up question about the media tensions, or the tensions between the media and the EFF at the moment. And we've had journalists, Xolani, facing allegations that they run parallel newsrooms in different media organizations, some even accused of being in the pocket of politicians. Isn't this what perhaps emboldens a stance like the one we see the EFF is pulling? Maybe I thought maybe we should take another direction and venture into other possibilities of what could be emboldening the EFF to with such a stance.
As I've said, that what is happening to us South Africans is quite interesting, because here the journalists as well as this political organization, they are kind of showing us the dirty or the rot that always binds them. And when that rot it starts to overwhelm them, they go to the public and then they expose each other. And so we need really to celebrate this, because at the end of the day, we need not to consume kind of poisonous information from the media. And so the more there is this kind of contradictions between political organization and the media houses, I think that's where what we call it a non-partisan media coverage is going to be born out of this conflict. And moreover, yesterday, if you remember, there was a time where people were asked if all journalists were in that media conference or media briefing of the EFF. And overwhelmingly, number of people, journalists, if I quote, they said, "We are here." It means that even journalists themselves, you know, they are not a homogeneous group. They represent different interests. Journalism, by its nature, is a mouthpiece of different interests in our society. And so we need not to be really surprised what is happening here. We need, as I've said, to have a serious discourse and say, at this time of fourth industrial revolution, are we still going to rely only on the kind of orthodox media coverage? Or are we supposed to venture into what the fourth industrial revolution is offering us? And so these cleavages that you see in our country is happening throughout the world. You know what is happening currently in USA, where Trump is really hostile to CNN. And you know what happened in Russia when some of the media houses are being banned daily. And you know what is happening in China, where you can't even have an access to internet and so forth. And so there is this kind of tug of war between the politician and the journalist. And so, as I'm saying, us as the public who are the recipient of this information, if this wars keep on prevailing, we hope that at the end of the day, the news that will filter to us are the news that we deserve to hear, are the news that are not partisan at all.
I can't help it but pick up on your fourth industrial revolution point there, but because had the EFF banned the SABC, there's somebody in the rural Eastern Cape who waits for the 9 o'clock English bulletin, and that's all they rely on. They don't have the kind of fourth industrial revolution. And I think it's important to debate these things and dissect them and get people like you on air. But I'm not going to ask you to comment. Let me move on now and get on to the analysis of what Malema has been saying. And I said earlier in the break that if we played a drinking game every time he said socialism, our bladders would probably burst. But he spoke in detail on what socialism, according to the EFF, is. And it painted a picture of what many South Africans want to see in politics. Do you think he's done a good job selling the Socialist Party to the electorate today?
As I've said, Malema is a pickpocketer. And unfortunately, only those who can read through his forked tongue, when he throws these scrambled eggs of ideologies to us. The fact of the matter is, when you talk about socialism, and when you talk about China, Cuba, those two countries are no longer practicing socialism, but they are practicing what we call it state capitalism. And so that's why I find it kind of confusion. Why is he praising socialism, whereas these two countries, China, Cuba, even Russia, they are no longer doing what we call it socialism. They are doing what we call it state capitalism. That's why when you are in Johannesburg, in Morningside, you see the Bank of China. You talk about Sino, China, Africa, and then also in Russia. That's why Russian companies were trying to get a tender to do the nuclear project here in South Africa, backed by the state. And so I don't really understand him when he talks about socialism, and then he gives us the examples of Cuba, Russia, and China. And you have to bear in mind also the issue of socialism and its failure, because they don't do socialism in its utopian format, because socialism is a kind of a utopian ideology that has been proven now. Bolivia, Venezuela, we're not doing what you call it socialism. And he also talks about the issue of Pan-Africanism, because he believed in Fanon. But the fact of the matter is a classical one. If I can give you an example, here in South Africa, we have numbers of African refugees who were sleeping helplessly at St. George's. We have never seen EFF doing anything to help those people. And so I think the issue or the discourse of Pan-Africanism among the political elite, it only resides and it only stops on the theoretical level, not on the practical level. Because he's talking about Mugabe. We know what happened in Zimbabwe with the Ndebeles. And so are we saying certain people within the Pan-Africanism discourse, their suffering are not important? Because if he was a Pan-Africanist, he was going to say what happened to the Ndebeles need a thorough interrogation, it needs a thorough justice. But he's not talking about that. It's just paper covering certain issues that are happening around Africa. And also if he aspires to be a socialist, socialist, the issue of skin pigmentation is secondary. But when it comes to the South African discourse, he keep on hammering the issue of skin pigmentation. That's why I am saying he is a pickpocketer. He's someone who plays around the emotions of the people.
And he also spent some time trying to dispel misconceptions about the party, refuting that it's a fascist party, refuting also saying it's also not an anti-white party. I'm picking up on your pigmentation point there. What do you make of his speech there, saying it's not a fascist party? What is it that he does that people end up labeling the party anti-white or fascist?
Look, in Africa, most of the political parties lately, post-apartheid, they stem from what we call it, although I don't like to use the issue of tribe. You get what I mean? I think what he's supposed to really be skeptical of is to be seen as driving the EFF to become a tribalist political organization, because number of people are starting to ask themselves why the so-called recently people who are earmarked to ascend into the highest position of that political organization are not the true reflection of the South African population or of the South African population. And so I think the issue of white and the issue of white monopoly capital is using it as a scarecrow, is using it in order to scare the white people and for him to find sympathy with the black people. But the fact of the matter that we know, him is dealing with the white people as well. And so is it good for him when it comes to business? He can have business partnership with the white people, but when it comes to politics, he reverts to the people who are coming from sheikhs, people who are poor, because he has to use the white people as the kind of the monument that causes such suffering to the black people. And so I think, as I've said, he's an excellent pickpocketer. He knows his primary target market, and he keep on sending his primary target market to search for the mirage. Because what he says today, if you sit down and listen it carefully, trust me, there is nothing tangible that those people who are there, they can say 4-5 years from now on, the EFF practically, that is how they can seriously save South Africa from this sinkhole. But what he's doing, he knows that he's not going to win the general election. He knows that he's not going to be accountable. And so he can say whatever that he wants. He can sound nice. He can come with the most radical and practical slogan, because he knows that he's not going to be accountable, because at the end of the day, is not going to win the general elections.
But Xolani, with everything you've said just now, EFF is arguably the fastest growing political party in the country. So I want to understand what will make the EFF or derail the EFF from its path of this growth that we see, in your view?
Look, when you talk about growth, EFF was born recently, and then it went into parliament with about, let me say, roughly, if it is 10%. And then they go to the general election, to the local government election. In terms of states, they've reached a ceiling. You get what I mean? There's no more growth anymore. It's the same thing with their EFF student command. When they entered to the political market of students, there was so much fondness to them. But recently, they are bleeding in terms of student representative council representation in number of universities. And so it's normal. During the formation of any political organization, it makes kind of a maverick entry into politics. But once it's there, people start to read it through, they start to understand what it stands for, and then that's where a number of political parties start to bleed. And so I don't think that the EFF really there is a serious growth. Look, Malema told us today that this political organization is like a dead organization, because he told us that the EFF student command is not doing great. He told us that the provincial council or the provincial structures are not doing great. And so if the student command that is supposed to target young people is not doing great, and if the provincial structures are in chaos, and so how can we, at the end of the day, reach to the conclusion that says EFF is strong, EFF is powerful, EFF has got future?
Unfortunately, that's all the time I have. I wanted to ask you about reconciliation, because he also touched on that and using Germany reparations to Holocaust survivors. But we'll do this another time. And this conference is long. We'll probably have you again tomorrow. And thank you so much for your analysis. Great as usual. Thank you so much, Xolani Dube, political analyst, joining us from our Durban studios. For now, from me, it's goodbye. But SABC News continues analysis and the in-depth coverage of the EFF Elective conference, which is held at Nasrec here in Johannesburg. My colleague Peter Ndoro will take you forward with the rest of SABC News.